Here are the notes for section 7.7 day 1. What we're going to do is write an exponential function in two different ways. First is whose graph that passes the following points. And then our second one is going to be using the regression feature on the graphing calculator. Let's go ahead and do an example 1. So here it says write an exponential function, and they give you the general form y equals a times b to the x, whose graph passes through 112 and 108. Our goal here is we are trying to find the a and b values. Now, in order to do this, our step 1, we're going to substitute x and y from each ordered pair into the function. So I'm going to go ahead and label my x and y value. So here's my x, and 12 is my y, and then same thing for 3x is that, and then 108 is my y. So now what I'm going to do is substitute those values into our general form. And they will always give you what the general form is on the problems. So we have 12 equals a times b to the first power. Our second equation is 108 equals a times b to the third. Now, step number 2, it says we're going to solve for b first by dividing the two equations. Now, when we do this, we want to make sure that the equation with the bigger, so notice that bigger exponent is on top. Well, if we look at our two equations, our second equation, 108 equals a times b to the third, has the bigger exponent. So we're going to put that on top so we can solve for our b values. So I have 108 equals a times b to the third power, and divide that whole thing by 12 equals a times b to the first. So now if we look, we're going to go ahead and divide. So we do 108 divided by 12, and you can put that into your calculator. We get 9 for that. Now the a should cancel out. And then this is using our exponent rules. Remember, when we have the same bases and we're dividing, we subtract the exponent. So we get 9 equals b to the second. So now what we want to do is get b all by itself. And in order to do that, we're going to get rid of the square. So we're going to take the square root because that's the inverse. So now we get b equals 3. Now, once you have solved for your b value, our step 3 is that we're now going to substitute b into either equation so you can find your a value. So it really doesn't matter. I always suggest probably plugging in your b value into the easier one. In this case, I would say the first equation is easier, but you can also plug it into the second equation and still get the same answer. So we get 12 equals, we have a times, now remember we plugged 3 in for b to the first. Well, we know 3 to the first just gives us 3, so we just have 12 equals a times 3. And remember, because we're trying to solve for a, we're going to get rid of that 3 by dividing both sides by it. So I divide both sides by 3. And so when I do that, I get 4 as my a value. So our very last step, because it does ask us in the problem to write an equation, is to rewrite the equation of the function, now just plugging back in our a and b values. So I'm going to have y equals our a, which is 4, times our b value, which is 3, to the x power. Now, once you've done this, make sure you don't multiply your a and b value, because if you do that, then you're actually going to get the incorrect equation, and it doesn't give you the same y values. So once you've gotten your a and b, just leave it exactly like this. Okay? Okay, now we're going to go ahead and move on to our linear, to our regression. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure you're emailing me, come in before or after school, and then at any time, make sure you slow down the video if you need to write everything down. So we're going to go ahead, skip these problems, and go into our exponential regression. So here it says a store sells motor scooters. The table shows the number Y of scooters sold during the X year that the store has been open. So part A, it says we need to write an exponential model for the original data. They will tell you specifically in the problem if they want exponential or what we're going to do in our other notes. Okay, so now here our exponential, they will not give you the general form for this. So make sure you have that memorized, or just go back to our first example and look at what's that general form. So remember that is y equals a times b to the x power. And remember, this is an exponential because x is in the exponent spot. So this is actually where you do need to get your graphing calculator, because that's the only way to do this regression. So let's go ahead and do that. So make sure that your calculator is on. And what we're going to do is first press the stat key. That is right by our arrow button. Now remember, we have done regression before. You've done linear when you were in Algebra 1. We have done quadratic and polynomial regressions from last semester. Now what we want to do is edit, so we're going to press enter. Now what you're going to do is you're going to plug in numbers into L1 and L2. Now in order to do that, we need to identify what our L1 and L2 are. So going back to our table, x will always be the L1, while our y value will always be L2. So now what we're going to do for L1, we're going to plug in numbers 1 through 7. So you have 1, and then you'll press enter, 2, enter, and so on. So just keep pressing enter after you've done each number. And we go to 7 here. So once you've done that, now you're going to arrow to the right for your L2. Remember, your L2 is the y values. So these y values you're going to plug into there. So we have 12, and then press enter, 16, and then press enter, and so on. I got 67, and then 96. Now make sure that your L2 and L1, that the same numbers match, okay? Because otherwise, if you kind of click onto something incorrectly, it will give you something different. Now what we do is go back to the stat key, and we're going to right arrow over to calc. Now because it's asked us to do exponential regression, we're going to go all the way down to the number 0, where it says exreg. That's what we want. Once you've gotten there, then you're going to press enter. And then make sure your X list says L1, Y list L2. If not, then it kind of changes everything. So now you just press the down arrow all the way until calculate is highlighted, and then press enter. And then here it gives you the A and B values for your exponential regression. Now here we're just going to go ahead and probably round to 2 decimal places. That'll be fine. Sometimes they'll tell you where to round to, sometimes not. It just make sure you read the instructions. So our A value is at 8.4, and we'll say round up to 6. So we have our equation as y equals 8.46. Now make sure you use parentheses around your B value. And then our B is 1.42. And then take that to the x power. So this is going to be our exponential model for this data that they gave us. Now if we look at part B, now it says predict the number of scooters sold in the 8th year. Notice that year is represented by x. So we're going to plug in the number 8 into our x value on our model that we just had in part B, or part A, excuse me. So we have y equals 8.46 times 1.42 to the 8th power. And then all you have to do, and this is, you can really use a scientific or graphing calculator, it doesn't matter. You're just going to plug this back into your calculator, which I'll show you here. So you can just go ahead, if you need to, you can clear this, okay, or just continue on. So we have 8 1.46 and then parentheses 1.42, and then take that, make sure you do the caret key to the 8th power, press enter. Now, because we're talking about scooters, it might be more ideal that we talk about whole scooters, because it doesn't make sense to have a half scooter or a quarter scooter. So we're going to round to the nearest scooter. In this case, it's going to be at 140. So that means on the 8th year, they sold about 140, and don't forget your label, scooters. Okay. So that would be our answer. Once again, if you have any questions of how to find an exponential equation or model using points or the regression feature, make sure you either email me or come in for after school to do so. And then don't forget, there are the filled-in notes on Schoology, so it will have these problems on here as well as maybe some extra ones if you need to look at those.